right now it's harder than ever to be informed because what we're seeing is not just a narrative from big tech and mainstream media. We're finding, and I don't know if you've been paying much attention to this, there's a monumental amount of censoring that's occurring right now.
Hi, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, you'll get my conversations with peak-performing thought leaders, creatives, and entrepreneurs. Every week, I bring you the latest scoop on what these incredible people do to succeed and how you can get their secrets and do it too. And hey, do you want to become a member of the Innovative Virtuoso Club? Our virtuosos get all sorts of exclusive content like bonus episodes just for you and videos to boost creative adrenaline and problem-solving juice. Go to isoldet.com/virtuoso to learn more. And now, let's get on with the show. Hey there, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am your host, and I am thrilled that you're here. I'm also really thrilled and honored to bring you this week's guest. You're going to just be, this is so cool. Monica Harris graduated from Princeton University and Harvard Law School. She was a business affairs executive in the entertainment industry. She enjoyed the money and the perks that many think accompany quote-unquote success. But about 9-10 years ago, she had an epiphany. She realized that she was making more money each year, yet struggling to maintain her lifestyle. She was working harder at a job she could lose in a, quote, restructuring and spending less time with her family. She also realized the world was changing in ways that weren't making her life better, and no matter who was elected or what they promised, the problems kept getting worse. Sound familiar to any of you? Yeah. So Monica realized she was pretending that she lived in a world that still made sense, and then she decided to stop pretending. And part of what our conversation is going to be about today is that really central theme, I think, in her life is to stop pretending. So in 2011, she and her partner moved their family to Montana from California to pursue a more sustainable lifestyle. She still practices law, but when she looks up from her desk, she sees pine trees, deer, and even the occasional moose. I love that. Free from the city grind, she sees the illusions that trap us all in a kind of distorted reality, and those illusions convince us that we live in a world we don't really live in. It took her nearly 40 years to unplug, but she's hoping that together we can do it a lot faster. I'm so excited to bring you this conversation because I think it's such an important one to have. Monica, I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you so much.
And Isolde, I'm honored. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We've had a conversation a little bit. We got to know each other a little bit a couple weeks ago, and you're amazing, and you're obviously brilliant, which is great. And I have a ton of questions about your perspective on things and also about the latest book that you've written, Reality Bites. But before we get to that, I'd like to go back to the beginning. What got you to that place where you were ready to change everything? It must have happened over time, but what was the final sort of nail in the coffin of your old life and got you to this reawakening into a new one?
You know, Isolde, I think you actually spelled it out pretty well in the intro. I think the foundation was laid because I had done all the right things. I had jumped through all the right hoops. I guess you could say I was the poster child for the American dream, a young Black woman born in the 60s, grew up right after the civil rights movement, benefited from quote unquote affirmative action, just was living a life that my parents could only dream of, meeting people and they never in their wildest dreams would have met, going to parties and mixers, in New York and Los Angeles and Beverly Hills. And it seemed like I had achieved everything I wanted, but it felt so hollow. When in my late 30s, it began to feel to me like there's something not right here. I mean, everything looks good on paper, but I have no life. I'm working so hard and it all seems so tenuous. And what really struck me is when I started to pay more attention to the economy. Now, this was way back in 2004, I think. I suspected something was wrong even before the housing market imploded. I remember making an offer on my house, the first home I bought. And it was $650,000. And my parents looked at me and said, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "Mom, Dad, this is how much a house costs now." And they're like, "This is crazy though. Our house cost $20,000 when
Right.
you were born." And I'm thinking, $20,000. I mean, that was when I think, Isolde, the wheels first started creaking in my mind. I thought, $20,000 when I was born, and now it's 650 30 years later. Does that mean homes were free in 1900? I mean, like,
They were just giving them away.
they were giving them away. And so I sort of filed that away. I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I think that was probably the first moment I began to wonder, geez, what is going on here? And how much is a house going to be if I have kids, when my kid is my age? Is it going to be $1,000,000?
Hmm.
And here we are in 2020 here in certain parts of LA. That's what it is.
Sure.
So it wasn't just my lifestyle that I was starting to reappraise. And you touched on this in the intro. I was also noticing that the world around me wasn't as advertised. And I'd say a turning point for me in that respect was the 2000 election, when I saw the Supreme Court that I was taught and trained as a lawyer to trust.
Hmm.
I saw these men and women twist the Equal Protection Clause in a way it's never, and I can't emphasize that strongly enough, never been interpreted before, and never has again. That the Bush v. Gore precedent can never be cited. The courts always rejects it, which is all very unusual. And they essentially handed the presidency to George Bush.
Hmm.
And that's when I really felt the ground sort of give way beneath my feet. But the strange thing was, a lot of people just, they objected to it. I was a faithful Democrat. A lot of Democrats just said, this sucks. I can't believe it's happening. But they moved on. But it was difficult for me to move on, Isolde, because I felt something fundamental had shifted. I felt I'd gotten a glimpse of something really ugly, and people were trying to cover it back up. And I'm like, no, but that's still there.
Right.
And then 2 years later, I saw my country invade Iraq on what I felt at the time was sort of sketchy evidence, but I was a huge supporter of Colin Powell, even though I was a Democrat. He was, I'm a Black woman. I was thrilled to see a Black man from any party, all right, be Secretary of State.
Sure.
And when he looked in us Americans in the eye during that hearing and said, Iraq has yellow cake. It has the means to make weapons of mass destruction. I believed him, and I was terrified. And I thought, whatever we have to do to keep this country and the world safe, let's do it. I'm behind you. Even if you're George Bush, I'm behind you. I'm an American. Only to find out 2 years later, it was a lie.
Mm-hmm.
The people I had trusted, and you can even call it a conspiracy. I know that's a dirty word now, but I don't think that George Bush pulled this off alone. I think he had to have help. Okay? So even worse, the media I had always trusted, outlets like the New York Times, like ABC News, NBC News, it almost felt like they had been complicit in the lie, because they were encouraging me to believe information about that war and about the evidence that was used to make the case for war. It's information they should have vetted, but they didn't. It's information that 2 years later, it fell apart. And I started to ask myself, how can this be? I mean, this is the media that I relied on to expose the Gulf of Tonkin, to expose Watergate, to be the watchdog, the thin line between a government that's accountable and one that isn't accountable. And yet they'd somehow fallen off the job. And that was confusing to me. And then it got worse. 5 years later, I saw an economy implode only 6 months after the Treasury Secretary, Hank Paulson, and the media assured us everything was fine. And here's the real kicker, Isolde. This was right about the time, I think, 2005, I discovered the internet. And not only did I discover the internet, I discovered the world of forums and chat rooms, all the stuff that's really like taboo now. I discovered alt news, not alt-right news, just alt news. In other words, news that wasn't, either explored or acknowledged by the mainstream media. And what I was finding out in alt news was there were red flags in the housing market. Here and there, foreclosures, strange things happening in markets like Arizona and Florida, not so much in New York and LA. We were the last ones to see anything. But it made me think, God, what's really going on here? Now, back then, that was called fake news. Oh, excuse me, back then, it wouldn't have been called fake news. Now, it would be called fake news.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out those people who saw signs, even though the mainstream media told them they were crazy, even though our Treasury Secretary and all the expert economists thought they were crazy, it turns out they were right. And most people were blindsided by what happened in 2008 because they never saw it coming. But I wasn't. And in fact, you'll love this story. The reason I was able to move to Montana with my family was because I pulled out of the housing market. I disregarded what the mainstream media was telling us 2 years before. I pulled out, took my cash, and rode out the storm and prospered by not listening. And that's the only way I was able to reinvent my life and buy a 20-acre spread in Montana at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. So I would say the culmination of these events set me on a path. And it's the one I find myself on today. It's the one that's compelled me to, as frightening and crazy and ugly as it may sound, it's compelled me to question almost everything I'm being told now by the people I've always trusted. It's almost like a fall from innocence. And it's been especially difficult because I was raised and trained to be among a class of people who are not just, it's anathema for us to question, but we are the people from elite schools who are supposed to trust and defend the system. We're supposed to be the ones telling anyone who questions it, no. This is why you need to fall in line and believe what you're told. I'm not one of these people who's questioning the narrative or challenging it because I've disappeared into a cult. I'm not a white supremacist. I'm a gay Black woman. But my experience has challenged me to think and to question the way I'm being asked to see the world. And that's the epiphany that I have, and that I would like as many people now as possible to experience. It is time, I think, for all of us to start re-examining and changing the way we see our world. And as you said in the intro, the recurring theme in my book is, I think it's time for us to stop pretending we live in a world that we want to think we live in. We want to think we live in a world where we can trust what our leaders tell us, that we can trust that the media, these really experienced journalists, that they're always giving us the truth. And we may suspect that it's biased, but we don't suspect that it's so deeply biased that it's distorting our reality. It's time we start looking at the world and the people in it and the institutions that control it in a completely different way. And I believe if we can do that, we can change this world. We can make it a world that works for most of us and not just for some of us, but only if we stop pretending.
Wow. Okay. So much. I love what you said about that we are being challenged to reevaluate how we look at the world, how we think about what our senses are telling us, what our experts are telling us. The question that I have, because I have so many questions about what you just said, but I want to make sure we cover this. How do we do it? How do we begin to take the blinders off and see the world more as it is? What are the steps to take? If you have any ideas, I'd love to hear them, because it sounds terribly difficult because there is such a bombardment of information out there. So what is your guidance for someone who goes, okay, I'm ready to start thinking more critically. What do I do next?
I'd say the first step is, it's going to be the most challenging, and this may sound heretical, but I think the media, and specifically, I mean the mainstream media, primarily and secondarily big tech, and I think we're clear on what big tech is, are we not? This would be the Facebooks, Twitter, YouTube. I think we have to acknowledge that these institutions are the most dangerous elements in our society right now. I believe that they are the mouthpieces that are distorting our reality
Hmm.
and keeping us from changing the way we think and see our world and see each other. And this is critical because you ask, what's the first thing we can do?
Mm-hmm.
It, we're divided on an epic scale right now. And this division has not occurred in a vacuum. This division, in my opinion, has been not only aided and abetted, but fostered, encouraged, and driven by media that pits us against one another. And that is a central theme in my book as well.
Mm-hmm.
The media is, it's not the media, it's to paraphrase, I think a commercial I saw as a kid, this is not your grandfather's media. Okay, it's not even your father's media. This is a media that is no longer dedicated to informing and sussing out the truth. This is a media that's dedicated to crafting narratives. And that may sound, at the risk of sounding paranoid, I just invite people to think about who owns the media these days. In the past 30 years, 90% of the media has now been consolidated into the hands of 5 corporations. Um, it's not your father's media anymore. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we, just average people like you and I, have in common with people, corporations, and billionaires? I mean, like Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. You know, Rupert Murdoch pretty much owns the Wall Street Journal. I mean, it just goes, you can go down the list. A tech billionaire owns the Los Angeles Times. What do these people have in common with us? I don't think we have anything in common with them. I don't think our interests are aligned. And if our interests aren't aligned with the people who own the media that's informing us, then I think it's only logical to ask ourselves, can we trust what the media is telling us?
Okay. So,
I'll go step forward,
mm-hmm.
further. If we can't trust what they're telling us, then we look at the narrative that we continue to see from the media,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of division, one of racism. White people, if you're black like I am, you can't help but turn on the news these days and get the sense that white people are incredibly dangerous. Like there are certain places as a black person you just shouldn't go, and white people shouldn't be trusted. Um, that is, it's something. It's a narrative that even when I was a kid, I didn't feel that there was this much racism. I wasn't I wasn't afraid, taught to be afraid of white people the way I'm taught to be afraid of them now, which is interesting because we're at a place now, I think, where people of color have actually never been more embraced. We've risen to positions of power in government, in business, in entertainment, in almost all levels of society. We've made so much progress, and yet the narrative we hear is that America is the most racist country in the world. It is incredibly dangerous to be a person of color in America now. And I think that one of the eye-opening points for me in my recent experience has been moving to Montana, a state that is primarily white, 90% white, and probably just as straight. And as a gay black woman, I moved here 10 years ago. This was before Trump would take office, but I found myself living in a part of the country that would later be called Trump's America. But something amazing happened. I managed to make a home here with people who look nothing like me and who don't share my lifestyle. And this is something we're told is absolutely impossible to do today. I should have crosses burning in my yard. I've been pulled over 6 times by Highway Patrol or Montana State Troopers since we've been here. I've only got a ticket twice. I've been forgiven 4 times. I haven't had nasty encounters with police, nor of any black people I know. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that the key to opening up our minds and beginning to disengage from this narrative and to question what we're told starts with the media. We have got to stop believing that everything they're telling us is true or even close to the truth. And that's going to be very difficult in a partisan America where if you're a Republican, you are dedicated to listening to right-wing news. And if you're a Democrat, you're all CNN and MSNBC. And nothing that comes from any other source will change or inform your opinion.
All right. So I understand all of that. And yet, when you talk about that, let's say we do pull back.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we go, okay, I'm not going to pay attention anymore.
Okay.
And I'm just going to live.
It's not just not paying attention. I'm going to start seeing people differently.
Absolutely. But
Yes.
here's the thing. I'm talking about not pay attention to the media. I'm not talking about, cutting yourself off from the world. But
Yeah.
But here we are, right? We need to, like it or not, we're in a global village. Like it or not, the internet is here. Like it or not, your Facebook is, it's pervasive. It's everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. You can, let's say, stop being on Facebook. Those things are things that you can do. But then where do you go if you want to be informed about what's going on? If you want to reach out to people, if you want to see people differently, if you want to have different kinds of interactions, how do you do it if you're not involved in the media? What are the sources?
Okay, so I think it's a very good question, because right now it's harder than ever to be informed.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're seeing is not just a narrative from big tech and mainstream media. We're finding, and I don't know if you've been paying much attention to this, there's a monumental amount of censoring that's occurring right now. The censorship is it's off the charts. People are being blocked, suspended, and banned from social media simply because they're sharing information that comes from a quote unquote non-sanctioned site, something that hasn't been fact checked. And that's what's very challenging right now, because one of the ways that I was able to come to my epiphany was in the early days of the internet. As I mentioned earlier, I explored alt news, right? And years later, that would be laughed at. They'd say, "Oh, that's just fake news." And even though it was called fake news, I continue to seek it out. But now what's happening is they've gone a step further. Mainstream media has gone a step further as a social media, and they're just eliminating it. So you can't even share it. It's considered misinformation. So it's now gone from fake news to misinformation to, just not even allowable. So it is difficult. I mean, I'll be honest. It is more difficult now to seek out the information we need to inform ourselves. What I continue to do, even with the mainstream sources, I always believe that the truth is neither on the left or the right, it's somewhere in between. So even if all you are allowed to explore, or all you have the energy to explore, is mainstream media, I would encourage everyone to at least visit as many sites on both sides of the spectrum as possible. So meaning, if you take this election, for example, it's, the media has declared Biden president-elect. He's got 306 electoral votes. We get it. However, there's still 47% of this country, if not more, that believes this election was, there was enough irregularities that they have severe doubts. That's what polls have shown. You have to, if you are a Democrat, you have to at least be willing, in my opinion, if you're going to open your mind, you have to be willing to say, why do these people believe this? And you're only going to be able to understand why half the country that you say that's in our global village that we're stuck with, you're only going to be able to see their perspective if you look at the news they're looking at. And if you can look at their news without saying, oh, it's all fake. Oh, it's all this. It's all misinformation. And I think that's the challenge now, is that a lot of people don't want to listen even to the other side of the mainstream news. And, I would say the same thing for people who think Trump has been defrauded. There's obviously evidence that he hasn't. There's obviously evidence that many states, the elections are conducted, totally fairly. There's no evidence of widespread fraud in all states. But I think the issue is we need to be willing, whether we're Democrats or Republicans, to listen to news that's coming from on the other end of the spectrum, and not just assume it's disinformation. And if we can do that, I think we can better inform ourselves. I think we can come to a more to more nuanced opinions where we don't automatically assume, oh, the people over there are wrong and I'm right, or vice versa. That is our only hope, I think, is to somehow be able to acknowledge that not everything that other people are saying and not everything we're reading in the mainstream media on the other side is wrong. Take in as much as you can. Be bold. Be willing to sample from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, Breitbart, all of it, and have the courage to make your own opinions. If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and yet here's the thing that I have so much trouble with. It's about perspective and perception, right? The thing that makes me, I will tell you, bananas is that, and I'm going to probably get, if you're listening, I apologize in advance because I'm about to be completely non-PC. I remember Michelle Obama saying, when they go low, we go high. And I appreciate the perspective of that very much, but the perception ends up being quite different. And the different perception that I end up having is they get to say what they want on the quote other side. I make I do not pretend about my politics at all. If you listen to the show, you know what my politics are. But if you get to say things like Crooked Hillary, 45 did that. I don't say his name ever. He did that a lot. Crooked Hillary, Crooked Hillary, Crooked Hillary. That happened so much. It was so ubiquitous that after a while, the soundbite became like an earworm. And so the perception shifted, right? And yet I don't see the same kind of thing on the other side of the aisle. And so that's the thing that I get to wondering about when you talk about that we need to have this open mind, which I strive for and don't always succeed for sure. I'm flawed in all of that. When you say we need to have an open mind while listening to Breitbart, to me, it's very hard to stay calm, to stay open-minded when I hear some of these sound bites. Somebody was bringing up Benghazi, for Pete's sake, right? So, and this was just a couple of weeks ago, because I do make a habit of going on Twitter and listening or reading some of that. It's so incendiary. It's so designed to sort of assault the senses of anybody who doesn't agree and foment the ideas of people who do agree or might agree with those sentiments. The language is designed to do that. The news, as we get it, they're designed to do that. So how do we build that awareness that is designed to have that visceral response, to elicit that visceral response? What do we need to do to step back enough to have a more measured response to what we're seeing and what we're hearing?
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that you see vitriol coming from certain quarters of the other side, particularly Trump, who's been just abysmally vitriolic. I couldn't agree more. But you don't see that same vitriol coming from the left.
I really, the thing is, these are my biases. I don't see the same amount. I remember very clearly during the Obama administration that being said a lot by both of them. When they go low, we go high. We ignore, we aim for truth, justice, et cetera, et cetera. And I love that in theory. I love it. The problem is that I think of it as a pendulum. I think if the pendulum swings really far to the insults and to the horrible sound bites on one side, and the other side is going, no, let's go high, let's take the high road, then the center of the pendulum moves over to a place that I am not comfortable with. So my question becomes, where are those left-wing pundits? Where are the ones who are, besides Rachel Maddow, who is doing one thing, where are the people who are pushing the pendulum over to further in the progressive cause or even the radical progressive cause? I don't see that. I see the vitriol coming. I see on the right much more vehemence, crooked Hillary, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't see the same amount on the left. So I keep watching the pendulum move over to places that are just not comfortable for me as a person who loves this country.
Mm-hmm.
This is my adopted country, and I'm so glad that we got taken in. But I love this country, but I see that happen again and again. And that's my question, is what do we then do about the fact that the pendulum keeps moving over? And so things we thought would never be appropriate seem almost appropriate today.
I mean, that's a good question about what we can do. Before I answer that, though, I think that let me start by saying, as I said in my book, I I took a hiatus from voting for years. I mean, I I think I was a diehard Democrat,
Mm-hmm.
and about 17, 18 years ago, for a variety of reasons, which I go into in my book, I just stopped voting. It seemed futile to me. Nothing
Mm-hmm.
ever changed. But in that hiatus, when I pulled focus and became incredibly detached, like almost spiritually detached, became like an observer.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed what people I think, only started noticing in 2016. I noticed that um, things change. This pendulum. It's a good metaphor, by the way. It's a great metaphor.
Thank you.
Yeah, that pendulum started when Bush got into office. That's when I noticed the swinging.
Which Bush?
I say George W. Bush, not H.W. so
Okay.
much. I think it was George W. Bush.
Okay.
That's when I first realized there was a red and blue America. And when Obama ran, I noticed something else. That was the first time I heard a president actually look at a large group of people and categorize them and say, and make judgments about a large group of people in public. Do
Mm-hmm.
you remember? I think it was in San Francisco. He was holding a fundraiser, and he referred to those people in the middle of the country or in the red states as those people who cling to guns and religion. And I remember thinking, wow, that's an interesting thing for a candidate to say, especially when he's supposedly trying to, appeal to as many voters as possible. Maybe he's
Mm-hmm.
just written these people off. And especially for a guy who says he wants to be a uniter. How many times have you heard that from Bush also? I want to be a uniter, not a divider. Let's see how that goes. So
Mm-hmm.
that stood out in my mind. And then we get Trump, of course. Oh, excuse me. Not only that, I think it was when Romney ran in 2012, he made a comment at a fundraiser that there's a certain segment of the country that'll never vote for him. And I think he was referring to the people who he says don't work, they're on welfare or whatever. And I thought, this is strange. Here's another candidate just like swooping, just making these just sweeping comments, negative comments about a large group of Americans. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
sit right with me. And then it got progressively worse because by the time we rolled around to 2016, we had Trump spouting his nonsense. But then on the other side, we had Hillary calling people what? Deplorable. Deplorable. We had a presidential candidate calling 50% of the country unworthy, borderline disgusting. I mean, if you define, look at the word deplorable.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the nastiest things you can call someone. They're unsavable. So I guess and it's just gotten worse since then.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I'm saying is that this pendulum has been swinging a long time. It swung, the left pushed it one way, the right pushed it even further, the left pushed it even further the other way, and now Trump is just almost swinging the pendulum off its moorings.
Mm-hmm.
This, I think, and now this brings us to where we are now with a vice president, President-elect Biden. We now have, and I don't know if you've seen this, and I probably should send this to you after this call. We now have the pendulum swinging so far the other way from the left that there are people calling to take names. AOC is calling to get a list of names of people who supported Trump so that they can be identified later, so that they can be punished with employment, that they shouldn't have any roles in government, higher education, any positions of influence. I mean, I forgot what country you're from, but you certainly know that this smacks of things we've seen in more disturbing times in history, in
Sure.
Germany, times in Southeast Asia. When people start taking names, we're going to a dark place. But what's interesting to me is that a lot of people don't even realize this is happening. There's a lot of vitriol, there's a lot of pushback coming in response to Trump's rhetoric that's even stronger than the rhetoric that Trump has given us. So yes, that it's my point is it's happening on both sides. It's escalating on both sides. What do we do about it? Isolde, the answer, I think, and I don't want to, I don't want your listeners to think that the solution is easy. It's not. It is not easy to change the way you've seen the world. If you're used to thinking that one side is more vitriolic, it is very difficult to pull focus and be willing to say, you know what? We've all contributed to this, and it's just getting worse. But if we're going to fix it, we need to be able to stop and look at the other side and say, I love you. You may not, I may not agree with everything you have to say. I may think you're full of vitriol and hatred. And this is a spiritual part of me talking, Isolde. We have got to be willing to love each other, regardless of who we vote for, regardless of what comes out of their mouths. We've got to be able to practice what Michelle Obama says. We've got to go high. And I love that she said that, but I don't love the fact that she said it and then swaths of people on the left proceeded to go low to match Trump. That's not the solution. If you say you're going to go high and the other people still go low, you don't say, oh, to heck with it, we're going to go low now. You stay high. And if you stay high enough, long enough, you will raise those people. But I don't think that's what's happening. I don't think that the left stayed high. I don't think they followed her guidance. It was wonderful what she said. We need to start living it on both sides. And I think if we can do that, we can turn things around. I truly believe this.
I would love to believe that you are right. I think that there's something that you said in the introduction to your book that kind of makes me go, you said you think we're running out of time. And to me, that it's not just about our country.
Yes.
It's about the world. It's about climate change. It's about the fact that we are headed to a tipping point that none of us might be able to come back from. And one side supports policies that keep pushing us closer to that tipping point, and the other one doesn't support those policies, or at least not on paper. So
which side doesn't support the policies?
Well, 45's policies, the GOP, they don't support taking action and pulling out of the Paris Accords. You know, all of these things, all of these actions over the last 4 years that have been designed to keep pushing an agenda of using more fossil fuels, not paying attention to climate and what it means to have that climate change. There have been lots and lots of policies, wanting to drill in the Arctic refuge, so many things that are designed to keep pushing that particular agenda. It makes money for the corporations at the expense of the environment. So, and the other side ostensibly is taking a different tack. Certainly Obama took a different tack. And so if we are to talk about what is that tipping point, it might not be political, it might be environmental. And if it is environmental, personally, I want to be led by a government that is interested in looking at that and being part of the global solution, rather than being led by a government who pulls out of the Paris Accords, who does so many other things that are designed to further an agenda that is against, and the environment and climate change are two of my favorite topics to talk about. But if you see what I mean, like people have said, oh, Biden is not much better. He might not be much better, but I don't feel like he is actively working against the best interests of the planet, which I believe 45 is.
Interesting.
So when we're looking at that, when we're talking about those perspectives, because I understand your ideal here, I think I get it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's to open up your mind and heart to people with radically different perspectives from your own. And I love that on an individual basis. I have a lot of challenges, and I'd love your guidance on that, on looking at embracing the policies, the platforms of politicians especially, who advocate for things that in my view, will destroy they won't destroy the planet because the planet will be fine for another 4 point some odd billion years. But they will, no matter what, if we die out, and this is something to think about.
Sure.
It could become uninhabitable for our species, for the many species we share the planet with.
Hmm.
That the planet will be fine. The planet will go through changes, and eventually something else will happen a couple billion years from now. But I'm selfish, and I want the planet to be fine for us and for our children. So that's the question that I ask
Mm.
to you is, how do we look at the other side that's advocating for something that moves us to a point of no return on a global scale with an open heart and an open mind?
So, Isolde, don't take this the wrong way, but this is
Hmm.
where I'm going to challenge you to really stop pretending.
Okay.
Okay. These policies that you, and I think, and I say this with all due respect, you and many others think are advocating a path to save our planet, to save, I'll even go beyond the planet, to save disenfranchised, to save, to save the little people. This is it's an elaborate good cop, bad cop
Hmm.
routine we see going on here. And I think you alluded to this in our our pre-call. It in many ways, we are being controlled right now by, as Gore Vidal would say, two wings of the same bird. They're taking us to the same place, both parties.
Hmm.
They just have different means of getting us there. The GOP is very upfront about where they're taking us and why. The Democrats, however, are much more veiled in their methods. Um, they're both destroying the planet, make no mistake. And I truly believe it is a delusion to believe that the Paris Accord will save the climate. What we aren't focusing on is the only way to save this planet is not carbon tax credits, because here's what you know about here's what you know about any credits and about any tax. The rich will always use those to their advantage. They will shuffle those credits around. They will find tax loopholes. This is what they do. They game the system so that they always continue to do whatever they were doing before, but in spades. So, what the Democrats, in my opinion, are doing is patting us on the head, saying, oh no, we're going to make it better. If you just follow our path, we're going to lead us in a different direction. They never have. They never have. The climate didn't improve under Obama. The climate didn't improve under Gore or under Clinton. The climate will improve under no president as long as that president is tied to the establishment. And now I'm going to get to the core of pretending, because as I say in my book, the real focus, the heart of all the problems we face isn't the Democratic Party, it's not the Republican Party, it's not racism, anything else. It is our monetary system. When you have a monetary system that is effectively a Ponzi scheme, a pyramid scheme, can we be clear about that? We live in a system globally, but especially the United States, that requires the creation of debt in order to sustain us. This is why, if you ever wonder, why do companies need to always grow? Why does the U.S. economy always have to grow? Why do households have to make more money each year? It's because it's debt creation. It's because the debt needs to be financed. The money supply must always grow. Now think about this, Isolde. If debt constantly has to go up, if money constantly has to be created, if consumption constantly has to expand, what does that mean for the planet?
I agree with
It,
you wholeheartedly. Absolutely. And here's the thing.
uh,
I understand that we live in a closed system. There is no energy coming except for the electromagnetic energy and ultraviolet energy that comes from the sun. We've got
right.
nothing that we can put into the system. And I completely understand that. But here's the thing: when
Mhm.
we have methods and guards in, like the guardrail for when you take your kid bowling,
Okay.
when we have those guards in place, things do improve. So, for example, between 2005 and 2010, if you look at, and I worked at
Hmm.
NASA for
Hmm.
many years. So if you look at sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide emissions, especially around our bigger cities, significantly less between those 2 years when we measure it from a satellite, just significantly fewer emissions.
Hmm.
And the thing is, it's because we had greater, under Obama, we had greater control in place about how much companies and cars could emit legally. Those controls were in place. We had less pollution in the air. That's fact. We can look at the data and go, this happened between 2005 and 2010. That happened. More controls meant there were fewer pollutants, fewer particulates in our troposphere and in our stratosphere, which we were able to clearly measure.
Mhm.
So when, saying that the Paris Accords will not save the planet, I don't know if they will, but the point is that if there's all these other countries who are willing to try, and you have the biggest polluter on the planet, our country, not willing to try, and in fact washing their hands collectively of it and going, we don't have to participate in this. If we're supposed to be a world leader, and this is the example we're setting, what are we doing and setting for the other countries on the planet? But B, if the biggest kid on the block is the one who decides to be a bully, then all the other kids either fall in line or that bully ends up alone. And so here we are. And your point is well taken about what Gore Vidal said. I remember he said that it's not the Democrats or the Republicans, it's the corporate party with two different factions, the Democrats and the Republicans. And I don't disagree with you. I think that is a point well taken. And yet, if we're looking at how what we do affects the rest of the planet, the rest of the world, the rest of the people around us, we have to take into account that they do approach it from a different perspective. And if the Democrats are leading us down the same primrose path, but they're taking into account some of those controls that will be helpful for us to mitigate climate change, for example, then to me, as a hopefully a critical thinker, I have to side with the side that at least wants those controls in place, because I've seen the data and I've seen that those controls, they may not work long term because we may be past the point of no return, but at least they're trying to do something. And I would much rather be in a government that has that as the perspective than the perspective of, well, we don't have to participate at all. We get to do what we want, which is what we found under 45.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think Obama's policies were definitely preferable to Trump's. I mean, Trump is out to lunch on so many of these critical issues relating to the climate and anything that isn't U.S. specific. He's solely focused on the United States, which is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
But my concern is that what I've seen from the Democratic Party, time and time again, as a woman who spent most of her adult life in the Democratic Party, I see an establishment that's devoted to incremental change. Incremental change in terms of wages, in terms of, I look at what's going on, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but just incremental change in the status of minorities socioeconomically in blue cities,
Mm-hmm.
where they, and I appreciate the incremental change he's trying to make in the climate, with the climate controls. But like I said, I think it's too little too late. I think that, yes, the Republican Party is going to destroy the climate faster. The Democratic Party is probably going to destroy it less quickly, but neither of them is going to do what we need to urgently to save the climate from long-term disaster. We're really talking about, between these two parties, one that will make the planet uninhabitable in 10 years as opposed to 20, or 5 years as opposed to 15. I don't see either of these parties on their current course saving this planet. And I think that's what I keep going back to.
Mm-hmm.
We are being conditioned to choose the lesser of the evils. This party is certainly going to destroy us by fire. This party is going to destroy us by ice, but ice will be a little less painful. I think it's time we tell ourselves, we can't keep looking to one party because they're marginally better. We need to reject both of them and start looking at the fundamental causes of our crisis that both parties are ignoring. I know, and it's easy to say, oh, well, I'm just not going to vote for either party, right? People have been saying that for years. But I look at like a candidate like Bernie Sanders, who I respected and who I voted for the first time in years. I voted this year. And it bothers me that even when we do have a candidate who speaks to so many important issues, not just climate, but the very important socioeconomic issues, that they're silenced. They're silenced by the establishment. They're silenced by the media. So it brings me back to what can we really do to change our situation? If we don't have the courage to reject the party of incremental change, and I believe that's all the Democrats are, the party of incremental change and inevitable failure. If we don't have the courage to reject them and the party of clear devastation, which is the GOP, we can't save ourselves. We just can't, Isolde. We are running out of time, and if we cannot bridge this divide and stop seeing each other as horrible as, if we continue to hate each other, it's over. All right. And I know that sounds trite. And I know that's not what you wanted to hear. I think you were looking for some sort of deeper solutions and answers, but I am not a person who believes that voting Democrat for the more sensible party that's making, arguably, and I'm not disagreeing with the data. You're totally spot on with your data. They are buying us a little more time. Mm-hmm. But my question is, even if we buy a few more years, if we don't do the right thing in those remaining years, if we don't turn to the true sources of our misery, then it means nothing. See, in my opinion, it's not just about whether the CO2 levels are rising in our atmosphere. It goes to, we are building a culture of obsolescence. We are now so obsessed with consumption. No matter who gets into office, we were obsessed when Clinton was there, when George Bush was there, Trump or Obama. It doesn't matter who's in office. We are obsessed to plundering our planet and destroying resources. It will do no good, okay? No good to lower the CO2 levels if we've stripped our land of timber, if we've overfished our oceans, all right? If we have, mounds of plastic from like disposable, crap sitting in the middle of the Atlantic and the Pacific. None of this will do any good if we don't attack the core source of our problems. We have a toxic monetary system that is destroying our planet. It's destroying people's standard of living. So I know you wanted to talk about climate, but I really think it's important that people understand that it's about more than climate. It's about, if the world were pristine tomorrow, Isolde, if we managed somehow to turn back the clock, all right, and we were living on a planet that had CO2 levels from 1950, what are we going to do about the fact that a handful of people on the face of this planet have more wealth than 70% of the others? What kind of world are we living in when we allow this to happen? That is the elephant in the room. We absolutely need to focus on the climate, but we also have to focus on humanity's the standard of living, our quality of living. People are literally dying on the vine now. Coronavirus lockdowns have only made it worse. We know why they had to happen. It's inevitable. But what it's highlighted, this whole pandemic is highlighted, is that our entire society, especially in the United States, hangs by a slender socioeconomic thread. What are we going to do about that? We cannot address that problem if we continue to vote for people who seem just a little better than the others when they're not confronting and addressing the heart of the problem. If we don't come together and stop bickering with each other and focus on the socioeconomic cancer that has taken root in our country, it won't matter what's happening in the planet climate-wise. It really won't matter. We have got to focus on this before it's too late.
So interesting. I understand and I agree to a certain extent with what you're saying. And climate change is one of my hot button issues, but it's by no means the only one I pay attention to. And the thing that concerns me and terrifies me about what you're saying is that we as a society, we as a world tend to reward the very things you're talking about,
Mhm.
right? So when you're talking about it in Reality Bites, when you're talking about what we're going to do, how do we then, again, you said something really interesting in the book. You said, I found that Americans in particular seem compelled to believe certain truths about our country, our institutions, and each other. We're really quite naive in that respect. So I keep coming back to this idea. You said, let's stop pretending. I love that. And you talk about the Matrix, which I also love this idea of take the blinders off and see the world as it really is. But where do we go? How do we do that? What are the steps? If we're looking at the monetary system, we're rewarding the very things that you're saying we can't reward. How do we stop the monolith from going in that direction? I mean, what are the steps that we can
Mhm.
take?
Mhm. So I remember, I think it was in 2009, or maybe it was 2008. It was in response to the financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
There was a movement, and Tim Pool, I don't know if you follow Tim Pool, he's fantastic, Timcast on YouTube. Tim Pool was one of the journalists who spearheaded or was one of the biggest advocates of Occupy Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember much about Occupy Wall Street?
I remember a bit. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I was in some of the protests. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So the central core of the argument was we have a central bank, the Federal Reserve, one of many central banks in the world, that has a stranglehold on our economy, and literally is it's a set of private banks that controls our economy, every aspect of our lives. And Occupy Wall Street is basically uh, a coalition of people from all walks of life, all colors, all both political parties, totally bipartisan, took to the streets and demanded change on a fundamental economic level. It is actually the sort of thing that Martin Luther King advocated towards the end of his life in the People's March on Washington. You know, in the final months of his life, Martin
Mm-hmm.
Luther King moved beyond the idea of, you know, racial equality and moved to the idea of human equality. It occurred to him that Black people would not advance until all people on all socioeconomic levels advanced. And anyway, he was going to that summer of 1960, I forgot when he was, 1963. He was organized a march. You know, it was going to be millions of people on Washington uh, demanding economic equality, fundamental changes to the economic system.
Mm-hmm.
He was assassinated 3 months before that could happen. But Occupy Wall Street, in my opinion, was the most recent and the only attempt since to follow through on MLK's vision. That's what I think we need right now, Isolde. I think we need some leader, some voice to rise above this fray of orange man bad, Democrat, libtard bad. We need someone to rise above that and say, look, we are all Americans. And we took to the streets this summer for Black Lives Matter. Okay. And I'm not going to sit here and say all lives matter because that's ridiculous. That's not my point. I think if we can take to the streets to advocate for the rights of 13% of this country, then even more of us should be able to take to the streets to advocate for 99.99%. We need a new march on Washington, a people's march. We need to follow up with what MLK did. We need to do it with the passion that we took to the streets this summer. It needs to be bigger and better. And I know we can do it. And it needs to challenge the economic system. Because what we've seen is that when people are in the streets, and it doesn't have to be violent. I can't emphasize this enough. It shouldn't be violent. This revolution should occur in our minds. It should occur by us opening up our minds and realizing we have more in common than we have that separates us. We're not Democrats and Republicans. We're not gay and straight, white and black. We are Americans simmering in the same pot that's slowly boiling right now, and the heat's being turned up. So you ask me what I think we should do? If I had the voice of a Bernie Sanders or even it's anyone with a critical following, if I had a Twitter following of 215 million people, I'd get them in the streets and I'd do a new People's March on Washington and I would make them listen to us. I would demand. There are other steps that I would take that are probably a little more non-traditional. I get to those later. But as a starting point, these people in power will not pay attention to us if we're just sniping on social media. They will only pay attention, as we saw this summer, if we are in the streets, in their face, holding up signs that say, we can't breathe.
Here's the thing, because I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I want to take a second, and I want to say, first of all, if you are enjoying this conversation and you're listening to this, you're going to need to go get Reality Bites. Let's just make that required reading over Christmas break. And I do want to talk real briefly. You have a number. You said that in the book that this whole book came about by a bunch of blog posts you did at letsgetunplugged.com, your website. And here's the thing that concerns me about this, about all of what we're talking about, is that we're living in a world where bootstrapping, where I was scrappy and I made my own way, is really very rewarded. And so when we're talking about economic rights, and you're saying let's take to the streets for economic equality, or at least almost a redistribution, that goes against some things that are very ingrained in us and are taught to us from a very young age. Well, if you work hard, you're going to make it. And so how do we do that? And you said something very early on in our chat today. You said that you were a beneficiary of quote unquote affirmative action. And I wanted to go back to that. If we're talking about leveling the playing field, if we're talking about actual economic equality and equal opportunity, how do we do that? How do we, taking to the streets is a great big show of energy, but how do we make substantive change? Because the change doesn't come from us. The demand for change comes from us if we take to the streets, like we noticed with Black Lives Matter this summer. But how do we demand change in a way that can work within the system? Because breaking down the system at this point, personally, I think it's too entrenched. I don't think it's going to break down until it breaks down from something cataclysmic. So then how do we make that happen in a way that feels doable and important to the people in power? And here's what I mean by that. And I'm sorry that I'm having a little trouble articulating it. I've always believed that you can't just force them to make change. You have to, really hit them in the pocketbook. Make it something that looks appealing to the people in power, that will make them more money or will be beneficial to them somehow. Otherwise, they don't have any reason to change. I mean, we're talking about substantive change on this level. But until some of those people in power either have an expansion, maybe they do peyote or something and have an expansion of the mind, until we have that, until we have something that makes somebody in power go, wow, that's a really good idea. What's their motivation? What is besides, hey, look, be a decent person and let's share the wealth. What's the motivation of somebody like a Jeff Bezos or even a Rupert Murdoch or whoever to go, yes, absolutely. Let's figure out a way to do all of this more equitably. How do we change their minds? How do we affect that change?
You can't incentivize people in power to give up their power. There's J.R. Ewing. Ewing. Did you ever see Dallas?
Oh,
did you
yes.
ever watch Dallas?
Sure.
Okay. I'll never forget when I was a kid, I was watching it, and J.R. said, "Real power isn't given; it's taken." So we can't count on the people who are in power now. And I don't think it's a stretch to say it's effectively an oligarchy in this country. Jimmy Carter and several other politicians and academicians have noted the same thing. We're not living in any capitalist system anymore. It's de facto oligarchy. Oligarchs will not willingly give up their power. Power must be taken. And it's not just oligarchs, anyone. How many kings, queens, emperors have in history have ever said, you know what, this isn't right. Let me share the power. Never happens. Power is taken generally through revolution, right? And war. Now, I don't want to see this devolve into a war. Don't think it needs to happen. Do not think that's the route we should go. I believe it must be a revolution. But, and this is important, it's when you think of the word revolution, most people, most of your listeners are probably thinking of Molotov cocktails, pitchforks, guns, things of that nature, right? The American Revolution. What I'm saying is that we need to take power with the revolution of our minds. The revolution is, as I've been saying, changing the way we see our world. Now, getting back to your point about what we can do in a practical level, you were right. Jeff Bezos is not going to say, I've made $40 billion in profit during the COVID lockdown. That's enough for me. I'm out of the game. It's time for me to step back and let other people start making as much money as I'm making. The people in power will only respect one thing, and that's money. So when you say hit them in the pocketbook, you're probably talking, or maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. You're probably thinking, oh, let's take our business elsewhere. Let's not buy at Amazon. Let's shop Etsy or something like that. That's a start. It's a start to go leave Wells Fargo and Citibank and go to your local credit union. That's a start. But I wonder, and this is all theoretical, of course, completely hypothetical, but it's just an example, okay, of the power people have that they may not even know that they have. What if Americans, and not just 5%, what if 15 to 20% of Americans did what our forefathers did in 1770? Actually, it was probably closer to 1768, the Boston Tea Party. You know what the Boston Tea Party was about, right?
Sure.
Taxation. Without representation. What if we did a Boston Tea Party 2.0? Okay, because that got the Crown's attention. Recall that? They paid attention then. What if we went on a tax boycott? How do you think that would play out?
Oh, I think it would be terrible.
No.
Because
tell me why.
Okay, well, for a very simple example, I lived in D.C. for many years. There's taxation without representation going on right now. So, and D.C. they will not let it be a state because there will be a lot more Democratic representation in two more Democratic senators. I don't think that the Republicans will ever allow it. So it's happening now, right? We're seeing taxation without representation happen now, and we've been okay with it for many years, and I don't see that fundamentally changing. So saying, again, how do we then incentivize people to go, I'm not paying my taxes anymore. That's it. I'm not going to do it. People in D.C. pay their taxes. They pay federal taxes, and nobody tells them that they shouldn't, because that's illegal. You will go to jail. Things will happen. Whatever.
Wait. You'll go to jail. 20 million people aren't going to jail, though.
Right. But see, that's the thing, is that we're talking about it on a macro scale, but
Sure.
But the individual person has to go, I'm willing to, and I'm using jail as a euphemism. You will get some kind of fine, something not good will happen to you if you decide not to pay your taxes.
Sure.
And it's not a macro 20 million people that the IRS now has to deal with. It's each individual person all of a sudden deciding, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to step up, and I'm not going to pay my taxes in protest. And then I'm willing to take whatever punishment is meted out by that. How do you do that as an individual person? How do we decide as a bunch of individual people that this is something we're willing to do in order to affect the kind of change you say we might get if we do it? There's no guarantee, right? So that's the trouble that I have because I agree with you. You and I agree fundamentally on just about everything you're saying. And yet in the practical application of it, how do we decide that? Using Rosa Parks as an example may not be wholly appropriate, but she wasn't doing this as I'm an individual person and I've had enough and I'm going to do this. There were plans in place for protests to be happening. She had a modicum of support, even though in the moment it was her on a bus
Sure.
individually.
It was
So,
coordinated. Yeah.
right. So how do we without using the media, without using Facebook or Twitter or whatever, how do almost 300 million of us, I don't even know if we've crossed the 300 million mark. Though,
320. We're 320.
great, 320 million. Wow. So how did the 320 million of us, and whatever percentage of that 320 million are taxpayers, how do we coordinate that? I mean, that's one of the things that I wonder about as we talk about this is, can we use the very media, the very channels like Facebook or Twitter or whatever to talk about this? Can
Yeah. And
we,
yeah.
what do we do?
I mean, that's a really good point, which, and I raised that earlier, which is it was actually easier to affect change about 15, 20 years ago when the internet was young. It was easier to find information. There was no censorship. It was a free for all.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've reached the point where anything that's remotely threatening to the establishment is censored, and it is disturbing. I'm sure you've seen it. It's getting worse. So how to affect any cohesive strategy among the collective, whether it's a tax boycott or anything else. And again, I'm just throwing a tax boycott out there. It's just one
Mm-hmm.
example. I think
Sure.
that when we put our minds together, we'll be able to find so many solutions. That's the thing I really want to emphasize, Isolda, is that you and I right now are spitballing two people on a podcast, and it's very difficult for two monkeys, and that's what we really are. We're two monkeys trying to fix the world's problems, right?
Sure.
But what I know about these monkeys, you get 100 or more of them together and magic happens. But we can't get the magic happening unless we're all at least focused on the same thing. I am a big believer in the power and energy of behind thoughts. You know, if enough of us, you've seen what happens. It's like the power of prayer. And I'm not a religious person, but I'm sure, just knowing what I do about you, Isolda, I'm sure you've seen what happens if you day in and day out are dedicated and focused on any idea, concept, project, and that is what you relentlessly pursue. Amazing things happen, right?
Sure.
Right? If that happens with just one person, if enough of us, okay, I'm even talking about 10% of this population, 30 million people literally had the awakening of the minds that I'm talking about and said, I'm done being taught to hate the other side in the media. I'm ready to work with people who don't look like me and who don't vote like me or sleep with the same sex. I am a full on just, and believe it or not, even in social media, it is still possible right now. There are still alternative means of whether it's me, we, and there are different platforms that are coming up all the time. But it is still possible for large groups of people to connect. Now, how much longer that will be for, I don't know. But my point is that it doesn't take 300 million people to make this change. A revolution, the American Revolution, it occurred with a small fraction of colonists, something like 15%. Most colonists really were just fence setters. I mean, and then there was like 15 or 20% who were like loyalists to the crown. But it wasn't. I think that's a great delusion, is that it takes the overwhelming majority of any population to affect change. It does not. It absolutely does not. We just need a critical mass of people who are willing to acknowledge and focus on what the true source of this problem is. I believe that if 5 to 10 or even 15% of the population directed their attention to changing our monetary system, okay, and coming up with solutions, not just what we're spitballing here, I believe the monkeys would find a solution. But we can't find a solution if we're thinking about everything but this. We can't find a solution if we're divided. And I think this is why the media works so hard to divide us. They know, okay, these people aren't stupid. They know that if just a small cohesive portion of us all get on the same page about A, what the problem is, and B, the urgency with which we need to solve it, it would be Black Lives Matter on steroids. Okay? It would be amazing. Look what's happened in the face of that simple movement. Look what's happened. It's possible. It is possible, but the first step is to change your mind. The first step is to get the energy focused on the problem. The first step is to pull away from the division, as hard as it is. Tune out this crap on media and just start to love your neighbor and realize we're all in this together. Let's focus on this monetary system. Talk to people about it. Instead of sitting down at Christmas and talking about like, oh, I hate Biden or oh, I hate Trump, let's talk about, hey, what can we do? Why is it that no matter who is in office, whether Biden or Trump is in office, our lives just keep getting worse? And that's the truth, Isolde, isn't it? The trajectory is always down. We're sitting here trying to make a bid on a place in a home in Missoula, Montana. We're talking about Montana, all right? We're not talking about a blue state where everyone's flocking to. We made an offer in a home. There were 10 bids over Thanksgiving on a home in Missoula, and all of them were over asking. Okay, this is what the world's come to. We are now living in a world where most people financially will have no shot in another 15 or 20 years. If you don't own a home now, okay, your kids won't own one. It is a really frightening reality that we need to wrap our hands around. And if we're gonna deal with it, we need to come together. And I think social media, it's compromised. It's true. It really is true. But we need to use it while as long as it is there. We may get shut down if we start coming together and sharing these ideas en masse. It could happen. But I refuse to. I'm not giving up hope, even though it's daunting. It may sound impossible what I'm proposing. I think we can do it. But the first step is acknowledging the source of the problem. You acknowledge it, that's great. But we need more people to do it.
You get no disagreement from me, and yet it calls for that idea of critical thinking, right? You state in the book that division is the greatest danger we face, and it's one that we have to overcome. Agreed. Absolutely. You also say something that I think is really interesting. You say that what we're seeing on TV doesn't match our day-to-day reality. But it's happening, right? So how do we combat that? What are the steps there? Because I remember getting, I can never have security clearance because I've been arrested too many times as parts of protests. So I remember getting cuffed when I was at the University of Michigan. We were protesting sexism and racism on campus. We had no phones to record what happened, and now we do, right? So if we focus on the few bad actions, like you said, because they're being recorded, because phones are there, aren't we all responsible for elevating ourselves and each other, though? I mean, even if we know that the day-to-day of our lives is different than what we're seeing in the media, can't we elevate ourselves anyway? And how do we do that if we don't call it out when we see it happen even on social media? How do we elevate ourselves when we see atrocities going on around us, even if they don't happen to us?
We absolutely have to call out atrocity. I certainly don't mean to imply that. I hope I didn't imply in my book that when we see injustice, we should look the other way. As Martin Luther King said, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I feel that very strongly as a Black person. I think the point I was making in my book is that it's possible, and I think it's even likely, that the frequency of atrocities is not nearly as high as we're being told. I have friends of color all over the country, and most of my friends of color in blue states are getting incredibly worked up about what they perceive happening. They're afraid white supremacists are lurking behind every tree. I have a friend from Harvard Law, gay black man, who refuses to visit me in Montana because he says, quote, "There's too many people with guns and I'm a Black man." I said, you know what? I have guns too, and I'm a Black woman, and I live next door to white people with guns, and we're fine with each other. And that falls on deaf ears. He's committed to a mindset. And I think that's the problem, as old as that. When we're as human beings, we basically see what we want to see. If we expect to find atrocities, we will find them because they're out there, right? They're there. If we expect to find a lot of atrocities, we will actually seek them out. We will find the bad news, we will find the bad players, and they will dominate our lives and our mindset. But I also believe that if you are looking for good people, if you are looking for good things happening between people and among them, you're going to find that. And I dare say you're going to find more of that, because I think that's prevalent. Atrocities are around us, but it's the minority of what's unfolding.
I agree with you completely. I think the vast majority of us are obviously good and decent people. That's not my concern, because to me, like, this idea of noting the atrocities, the things that the crimes that are happening. We can talk about Breonna Taylor, we can talk about George Floyd, we can talk about any number, and Black Lives Matter is we've seen what the movement was able to do. But haven't those atrocities, haven't those criminal acts always been happening, but now we just have methods to document them? Now people are seeing that this happens, because how much had it been happening, but there were no police body cams, there were no people with iPhones chronicling what was happening. Would we, if there had been no camera proof, what would we have known about George Floyd? What would we have known about any number of these crimes that happened? How would we have known about it? And isn't that part of being able to do something about it, is knowing that it's happening?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that these atrocities have always been happening. It's almost like the number of earthquakes. We hear more, about more earthquakes all over the world now. Well, it could just be that we have more seismic machines all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that information is now being shared about earthquakes, happening in places we never even knew about before. And I think something similar may be happening with race relations and hate crimes. I think they've always been going on, but like you say, we had no idea. Having said that, I also think that something's changed in the atrocities, in the degree of atrocity, let's just say.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid growing up in the 60s, it was still not uncommon for Black people to be lynched,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in the South. Now, Medgar Evers, I believe that was in the 40s or 50s, but it still was not uncommon to see things happen to Black people that now would be absolutely unimaginable. Absolutely unimaginable. I think that a lot of the police brutality is like an airplane crash. It's a loud, juicy, high-profile moment, right? But if you look at the number of the instances of police brutality that have occurred over the last 10 years, there have been little spikes here and there, but on a whole, the trajectory has gone down. On a whole, it's not like there are hundreds and hundreds of, 1,000 instances of police brutality. So a man being killed at the hands of, a Black man being killed at the hands of cops every year. It's more like several hundred, or maybe 500. I have to check the stats. I remember I wrote about this in my book, but the point is that I believe that we're seeing atrocities like we never have before, but on a per capita basis. When you compare the number of people in this country now, 328 million, and the number of Black people in the country, 13% of that? So you're looking at 35 million people, Black people. When you look at those numbers and then you see the actual number of people who are victims of these atrocities, and you compare that same ratio to 30, 40 years ago, when there were so many fewer people, so many fewer Black people, I think you'll see that America hasn't become a more dangerous place to live. It's not like there are more atrocities going on. We're filming more of them because they're just happening so much more and we never knew about it. I think America is actually a safer place to live, but our reality is being distorted by the ease of mobile filming and social media. Our reality is being distorted to make us think that America is a less dangerous place or a more dangerous place for Black people than it really is. That's what I think is happening. These atrocities have existed, and have always existed. And here's the bummer: they will always exist. As long as there are differences between people, there will always be others who are abused based on the color of their skin and their gonads and other immutable characteristics. It's going to happen. We're unenlightened people. We're an unevolved species. But I just feel, and I could be wrong, but it's been my experience in looking at the data, that we are being conditioned to fear, as Black people, we're being conditioned to fear white people on an unreasonable level. I know that's heretical. I know this is
No,
not what a lot of people want to hear Black people say.
no, and it's not, I don't think of it as heretical, but it is definitely radical. It's a different way of looking at it. And so
Think about it, Isolde. If you're in charge, if you were trying to control a large group of people, and if you're I mean, if you can work with me here, if we are truly living in an oligarchy, as I think we are, and it's important for you to keep people in control, wouldn't the first thing you do be to try to divide them based on the most inflammatory means possible? Wouldn't you try to divide races if you really wanted to maintain control? Doesn't that, I mean, it's sort of obvious, isn't it?
divide and conquer has been used as a method of winning wars and controlling for millennia. I certainly I agree with you, and yet here's the thing. What I'm concerned about with respect to all of this is that we it's not it's like things are at a fever pitch. It's like they're being exacerbated instead of being able to chill out in whatever way we can chill out. I'm a big proponent of meditation, for example.
Yes, me too.
So that's my method of yoga and meditation. That's how I chill out, and I go on bike rides in Brooklyn, New York. Those are my methods, and pet my cats, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so I've seen, for example, in schools where when you go to teach meditation or yoga in schools, kids who would normally have a lot of trouble are just a lot more calm and peaceful,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and which I think is great. We don't do that on the whole in society. We don't advocate for chilling out. There are lots of apps. You can go to Headspace or Calm or whatever and try to do that, but we're not taught that. We're not shown that. So I think a lot of us end up in a frenzy.
Mm.
And how do we step back from that? You said something that in the book that really struck me. You were talking about hate being hate, and you said that in a post-racial America, that, and this is your quote, people with color have been granted a free pass to spew hate at those who don't have color. And I wanted to find out from you what that means, especially since institutionally people who don't have color, who are white, have been granted privileges that people with color haven't. So how do we address that? How do we address this idea that in this post-racial America that you're talking about in the book, that this is the paradigm we're living in now?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay, so if we are living in a situation in a society where at our base we don't have equal opportunity to success, we just don't, right? There are lots of different reasons for why I might have a different level of opportunity than someone who lives in Montana or Nebraska or Southern Florida. Whatever those reasons are, we don't have equal opportunity to strive for success at its foundation. So if that's true, And people who are a certain socioeconomic status or or certain color of skin or whatever are granted privileges that people who don't have that color of skin or don't have that socioeconomic status or don't have that family history, whatever it is, if they're not granted those same privileges and there's a reaction, like you said in your book, that people with color have been granted a free pass to spew hate at those who don't have color. How do we combat that? How do we say to someone who's justifiably livid as a result of all of this that they are not supposed to be livid? How do we say that?
Well, I'll say this. I'll put in the words of, Martin Luther King. And I just keep going back to him because now more than ever, I think he's been a guiding influence in the way I'm living my life now and in much of my writing.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he would tell us is that hate by any other name is still hate, as I said in my book. And it does us no good whatsoever. You put it another way, we cannot solve the problems we face as Black people by combating the hate that's been dealt to us for generations with more hate. Hate begets hate, and it leads to a very ugly place. The way to combat or to overcome the lack of privilege I and all of my people have been born into is with love. And I know it's difficult to love. And I'm so glad you mentioned meditation, because I meditate every day, every morning for an hour. I've been doing that for quite a few years now. And it's changed the way I see the world. And
Mm-hmm.
you asked me the steps we can take. That is definitely one of the biggest steps we can take, is to still our minds. It was easy for me when I moved to Montana. I had no choice but to still my mind because the stimuli disappeared. I was in the middle of the woods.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation for people in the city will do wonders. But anyway, getting back to your point, there are some members of the Black community, and in fact the white community also, that have adopted this idea of the critical race theory of race relations, which assumes that racism can only be practiced by those in power. Therefore, Black people can't possibly be seen as racist. Now, I disagree with that because I believe racism doesn't require power. That's a new definition of racism. Racism means looking at someone and treating them differently because of their race. That is the way I was raised. That's the way I've always defined racism. And I refuse to embrace a newfangled brand of racism that's been, I think, manufactured in the last 2.5, 3 decades, that assumes that Black people, because of the way they've been treated, because of the abuse they've sustained, are now free to abuse and hate others, almost to take some sort of social retribution. It's almost as if, I talked to my partner about this a few months ago when I was writing my book. It's almost as if Black people are using their color as a weapon in many respects. They've been abused so long and so hard and so deeply that the only way we know to fight back is by using that same hatred against our abusers. The danger in this is that if you really want to get people on the same page with you, and I think that should be our goal, I don't think any Black person in their right mind doesn't think that, believes we're going to get ahead without moving forward together. But if we continually spew hatred at people who could be our allies, we're going to alienate them. They're not going to be on our side. And even Martin Luther King, if you think back at the civil rights movement, imagine what would have happened if Martin Luther King, in the late 50s and early 60s, when he's trying to get this critical movement going, if he had said to Black people, you've been screwed all your life. They've had privilege that we've never had. They've treated us with hate. It's time to get even. Let's blow back on them. I want you to call out, you go out there and you spit on them in public, you call them out, you make them feel like crap. You remind them of their privilege, and you do it in a way that belittles and demeans them. That's the way we're going to take our power back. Isolde, if he had done that, how far do you think he would have gotten?
Oh, I can't even hazard a guess. And
It
you
wouldn't have
know,
worked.
right?
It
But
wouldn't have worked.
you know what though? Here.
He needed allies, is my point. The civil rights
Absolutely.
movement, the civil rights movement only was successful because it had a critical mass of white allies. And what we are doing right now, when we say that, okay, it's fine to hate white people because they've hated us, we're losing our allies, we're losing our base, and it's going to backfire. That's my concern.
I actually share your concern on that very much. And I don't know if you saw this. David Letterman has a show on Netflix called My Next Guest Needs No
Yes,
Introduction. So,
yes.
did you see the interview with President Obama?
I did not. Everyone's been telling
Oh,
me it's a must see. Okay, I've got to
it's a
put that
must
on my
see. It's a
list.
must see.
Okay, thank you. I'll do that.
The reason I'm bringing it up is not so much about Barack Obama, but
Mhm.
in interspersed in the interview, David Letterman went to other people, and one of the people he went to was John Lewis, and they went to the bridge, and they were talking about what John Lewis had felt in that moment when they were walking across the bridge, and he said we didn't get very far, before, and there's they showed video footage of what happened there, and but he said something that I think ties into what you're talking about very much, and he said if we hadn't done what we did, we would not have a Barack Obama sitting in the Oval Office. We would not have had that.
Mhm.
And so I think those efforts are cumulative. And I think those movements, they do ebb and flow. And the more inclusive we are in these movements, the better. So the question then becomes, you know, again, I come back to that notion of the pendulum. What do we need to get the pendulum to move so that more people, and I'm not talking about races here, I'm talking about just people,
Mhm.
more thinking people, whoever they are, start thinking that this kind of equality, that this kind of movement, that this kind of restructuring is a good idea. What do we need to do?
We need to rebrand it. Um, this movement needs to be acknowledged for what it is, which is it's a class revolution.
Okay.
I think we need to start reframing the discussion now from race to class. And you will notice that the people in charge, particularly in the media and at all levels of politics on both sides of the aisle, that is a word that almost never comes up on stump speeches and debates, on pundit panels. No one wants to talk about class because it is the elephant in the room that can unite all of us. When you get a major discussion going on that subject, Isolde, I believe you will see phenomenal change start to take place because it is right there, just simmering beneath the surface, just waiting to come out, and it's being suppressed. And I also think that once we have an open and honest conversation about class, bipartisan, biracial, we will see solutions spark that you never would have imagined. You and I are sitting around here again. I keep going back to this. We're spitballing. We're just two monkeys trying to come up with an answer. We can't do this alone. Solutions will manifest. As daunting as it seems right now, I believe solutions will manifest if we at least get people talking about the real issues. The blackout, and that's essentially what it is. It's a discussion blackout on the root causes of our misery. That's our biggest problem, and division obviously contributes to that. But this is a. I don't want to make it sound dire, but this is a class war. We are engaged in an undeclared, quiet class war. People are dying all around us. Family members, colleagues, peers falling into trenches. And we're just like, okay, well, as long as I don't fall in the trench, I'm just going to keep my head down and move forward. Well, one day we're going to fall in that trench too. The end of this war is that there are only going to be a few of us left standing.
I'm reminded of that quote, and I don't remember. I saw it at the Holocaust Museum, and and then they came for me, And that, first they came for the Jews, then they came for this, and then they came for me, and there was no one to have my back, essentially.
Mhm.
And I think you're right there. And it's interesting what you were saying reminded me of the John Steinbeck quote: the socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Yes,
And
yes.
so when we look at that, quote and we go, okay, if you and I are two monkeys and we are trying to come up with a solution, but we're spitballing, how do we get those temporarily embarrassed millionaires to get excited about it? Like when I was saying earlier about get them in the pocketbook, I wasn't talking about let's all boycott something, because boycotts only work so much.
Mhm.
It's almost like I want to figure out a way to change the perception that it is profitable, not make it profitable necessarily, because I don't know the ins and outs of the economics of these huge corporations. But how do we make it seem like it's profitable, like it's in their best interests to work towards this? If they're temporarily embarrassed millionaires, they may not want to. If they're the heads of conglomerates or multinational corporations, they also might not want to. So how do we wake them up? What are the steps? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I don't, as I said before, I don't think we can incentivize or wake up people who are in power. I think they're fully awake. I think that they know what their their what their best interests are, and they actively advocate for their best interests. The people in charge are not in denial, um, as much as you say, the embarrassed millionaires. Um, Interestingly enough, though, I think that our fabric, our socioeconomic fabric, is deteriorating at such a rapid clip that these embarrassed millionaires, and they've been pretending, to go back to that metaphor,
Mm-hmm.
they've been pretending all their lives, but that game is almost up. I think a lot of people, see, the thing goes back to what gave rise to Trump. I think a lot of people in the establishment and on the left in particular were surprised when that man was elected. I wasn't surprised at all, because I traveled around enough of the country, and especially when I moved to Montana, to know that we were reaching a tipping point. And he was inevitable. If it hadn't been him, would have been someone else. That's what gave rise to Brexit. I think that we are rapidly reaching a point where people are going to have to acknowledge, by the sheer severity and the desperation of their economic circumstances, that they are not embarrassed millionaires, that they're the cheated enslaved. And that's really what's happening. We are being quietly enslaved financially, and we don't have the guts, the courage, the whatever. It's almost like a woman who knows her husband is cheating on her, knows it, feels it. Fine, here's the phone ringing in the middle of the night, and then it hangs up. Finds the receipts at hotels, finds the lingerie in the glove compartment of a car. She knows, but she doesn't want to admit to herself, I've been duped. He's stepping out on me, because he says all the right things. He makes you think that the relationship is still strong, but it's not. And I think that's what these embarrassed millionaires, this duped proletariat, as Steinbeck refers to them, they are coming so close to realizing now who they're really dealing with, who they really are, and the country they really live in. Um, and when we finally can, when all of us can finally wake up to that reality, uh, I think that there really won't need to be an incentive, Isola. We won't need it. It will be a matter of survival. What I'm asking people to do is, before we get to that point, if we wait for things to take their natural course throughout history, what we're seeing is not new. This is a story as old as time. This is the
Mm.
powerful controlling the weak. We know how this ends in normal, just historically speaking. It usually ends violently, right? What I'm hoping we can do, if we first have the revolution in our minds instead of on the streets, it doesn't have to end violently. So I'm desperately asking people to come to, I don't know, another way of resolving this, which, again, for the reasons you pointed out throughout this discussion, it's not going to be easy. You keep asking what the first steps are, and I keep going back to, first step is love. being able to look across the aisle at someone you hate or you think hates you, and and being willing to admit that, hey, you know what? They're like me. And they may not look like me or act like me, but they're an American, and we all want the same things. Let's let's just stop believing everything that's pushed to our device. Like you said earlier, it's our minds are constantly caught in this spin of inflammatory crap. We are just glued to devices that are just inflaming us 24/7. No one stops to just take a break. We don't, as you say, very few of us meditate. We're just caught up in nonstop drama, and it's getting worse. We need to have the courage to pull back from that. And I know it's easier said than done, but I wish there were more people with a voice. Unfortunately, most of the influencers these days are influencing people to be angry and to divide. We need someone to step up, someone with a real voice that millions pay attention to unite and heal us. And I keep hearing that on the left. I mean, I was happy to hear Biden and Harris talking about, now it's time to unite, now it's time to heal. Unfortunately, and I'm going back to what I said earlier in this discussion, what's going to make that harder to do is the fact that 47% of this country now thinks the election was stolen. Now, this is very concerning to me, Isolde, because I fully believed that Gore should have been president.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the Supreme Court of the United States prematurely halted recounts of precincts in Florida and delivered the presidency to George Bush. I will always believe that. Now, even though I disagree with the result, I understand how the result was reached. I wasn't happy, but I accepted it reluctantly. We have something different here. We now have 47% of the population that believes an election wasn't just given to a candidate because of aborted recounts, but because of fraud. And there have been hearings that have not been on the mainstream media. There's been all sorts of evidence that comes out that apparently isn't enough evidence. And at this point, it doesn't even matter if the evidence is sufficient. The problem is if nearly half the country does not believe someone is really president or who actively cheated to become president, that is a recipe for more division in our country. And that's the last thing we need. And I desperately wish that this had been handled differently and that we had an open and transparent forum where I don't know what should have happened in Congress. I don't know how it could have happened on such short notice, but we need to address openly the concerns about the integrity of the voting system, the way we did, with Russian meddling. And I hope that when Joe Biden's in office, there is an investigation, just like there was with Russian meddling. So it puts people's minds at ease because, and I can't emphasize this enough, if nearly half the country thinks that this man cheated to get in office, beyond what George Bush did, we're done. We will never come together. That is division that's insurmountable, right?
Well, here's the thing. I again, the division is there, and one side or the other side is going to keep doing that. I think that has done the way this has been handled has damaged. I can't even say our democracy, our republic. No,
Yes.
because
Right.
I wish that we were truly a democracy. I don't know that I believe that we are, but look at 2016, and again we come to this. Well, Hillary conceded, right? She won the popular vote by several million votes, and she still conceded.
She had
So
no choice. She had no choice to concede, though. That's the thing. It wasn't a
right,
yeah.
but here's the thing. Regardless of anything else, when we talk about this idea of that pendulum and where we are with respect to the sort of conservative right and the liberal left, whatever we want to call it, one side in 2016 went, well, rule of law, electoral college, this is how it is. Even though I won the popular vote, I'm not going to jump up and down. Can you imagine if she had jumped up and down the way 45 has and been so vocal about whatever to contest the results of the election, she would have been even more vilified than she was, right?
I know, no, I don't think so. I don't think so, Zold, because she wasn't alleging fraud. What she was alleging was I think it's a problem in the Constitution that the candidate who wins the popular vote doesn't become president. That's a constitutional issue. It's happened four times in history, I think.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. Here we have a sitting president who, this will not be over until 11:59 a.m. on January 20th, 2021, as far as I'm concerned. It won't be over,
Exactly. Right.
So that's my point, is that
Mm-hmm.
she was going rule of law. Let's talk about the Constitution.
Right.
Let's talk about, this is not what he's doing. He's not going, oh, rule of law. He's going, I'm going to keep screaming sound bites about fraud and whatever else, and tweeting whatever it is he's going to tweet. And that's the issue for me, is that that's what's damaging. She had a legitimate argument there, regardless of whether or not you agree with the Electoral College. She had an argument. Hey, I won the popular vote. What's going on here, right?
But that's not. See, I don't see that as a legitimate argument because it's not the rule of law. That is not the rule of law. The popular vote is irrelevant. I think the issue is that if we had known about Russian meddling, and we know that Russian meddling became an issue in the 3.5 years following the election, right?
Sure.
If Hillary had had the same Russian meddling argument or evidence or whatever, suspected evidence, a week after the election, do you think she would have conceded? Or do you think she would have said, this isn't right, this election was stolen?
I would hope that she would say this isn't right. The election was stolen, because it was. But the point is that she didn't do any of that. She did not say voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud. She didn't yell and scream. She didn't froth up anybody. She went, okay, this is it, and I am going to concede the election, and that's that. This is not what's happening now, right? This is the opposite of what's happening now. So
I think to me, it seems like apples and pineapples, because what's happening, if she had felt, she felt very much, I think, the way I felt in 2000. She was like, it is ridiculous that the Constitution allows the Supreme Court to abuse its discretion and hand the presidency to someone like this. I think that's how she felt. She was upset because there was a constitutional, I don't want to say loophole, because the Electoral College is not a loophole. She did not think that the result was illegal. She never alleged that.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was more disappointed that many people in the United States would vote for a guy like him. That's what it was.
And I agree with her.
Yes, absolutely. So many of us. So that's what it was for me. She never once asserted this was illegal, this was fraudulent,
completely,
that something wrong happened. She accepted the will of the people.
Right.
The difference is that we now have a situation where there's a question as to whether the will of the people was even reflected, not just here and there, but in many, many instances. I mean, like, listen, I was listening to these hearings yesterday in Arizona. It was crazy. Did you know did you know that information or data on the DRE servers in Arizona actually went to servers in Frankfurt? Data was being transmitted to Frankfurt, Germany. What I'm finding out, and again, this goes beyond Trump. Apparently, this has been an issue that was raised the past few years in many elections in many states, including Georgia in January of this year during the primaries. We are now learning, okay, that our election systems can easily be compromised, and we're likely compromised in some fashion. We've heard testimony from military information warfare agents who say that the voting systems were even open for periods of time to the internet. Now, we don't know that that there was fraud. We just don't know. But the question is, or the point is, we have questions being raised now that we didn't even have to think about in 2000 or 2016. It's a whole new ballgame, and I hope that they get to the bottom of this, so that in 2024, we're not looking at this again. because we can't have people. It's one thing to have a candidate say, I object to, or I think it's so unfair that the Electoral College doesn't allow someone to win when they don't get the popular vote. We're going to have to change the Constitution, but it is what it is. It's another when a candidate says, look, I don't even think they got the other candidate got the votes, and 47% of the people believe them. That is a different kettle of fish, in my opinion, and we need to deal with that soon.
Oh, I agree with you on that. Absolutely. And yet, who knows if there was voter fraud. I forget which one. I saw a story just recently where they redid the count, and that the 45 campaign paid for the recount, and Biden's lead increased by 132 votes. So, who knows?
Yeah, what's that about? I don't understand. Well, look, I'm not surprised by that, I guess, but it's just how these recounts. It's almost like what is it? Have you ever tried adding up 50 numbers or something with a calculator? It's like, I've done this 5 times and I keep getting a different number.
Absolutely. That happens to me all the time. Absolutely. I'm notoriously bad at that. Yeah, but it is interesting, and it is something that I think you and I could stay here for the next 6 hours and talk with you about this. It's such an eye-opening and delightful experience, and I know you have a life to get back to, so I won't keep you too much longer. But it is interesting to me that you were prompted to write Reality Bites. And I love the title. The whole title of the book is Reality Bites: Insights on Bridging the American Divide. I think that is phenomenal. What a great, great title, because that seems to be the theme that you wanted to explore is that there is this divide, and how do we do it? So then what's next? What's next for you as part of this, I know, for example, that you're not off social media. You're on Facebook and you're on Twitter. So you are participating in this system to affect change, I'm assuming.
Yes.
What steps are you going to take? And by the way, I'd love it if you'd share your Facebook and your Twitter accounts, so that if you're listening to this, you'll be able to follow Monica Harris and engage with her in this very important conversation. It would be great to have that, but I would love to know what's next for you before we move on to my last question, which I ask every guest on my show.
Well, I think I don't have this plotted out, I think, is in a detailed manner as I should. A lot of this has been a labor of love for me, and it's been born organically. But what I'm trying to do is to speak as much as possible. I'm trying to reach out to as many podcast hosts, get in as many radio show hosts as possible. My wildest dreams, I'd like to do a TEDx talk when the world goes back to normal, or maybe before then. But I think at this point, it's a matter of speaking to people. Not writing is still important, but I really think I've been called upon to communicate my message as widely as possible. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trying to do. Those are my next steps. And people like you helping me do it, I think I can make it happen.
Well, here's hoping.
Yeah, that's right.
It's my pleasure. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time. Would you mind sharing your Facebook and your Twitter accounts so that people can contact you and can connect with you?
Yes. So Twitter is Monica at Unplugged Now. That's UNPLUGGEDNOW. And my Facebook account is just Unplugged.
Okay, there you go.
Right.
Wow, you got Unplugged. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I couldn't
hold on. Yep. I think I rarely actually look at the info page. I just sort of default to my Facebook page. But yes, it's Unplugged. So
great. So I will be putting that in the show notes, so that if you're listening to this and you want to connect with Monica and obviously, definitely, if you're a podcast host or if you're in the media, she's obviously a great speaker, a great orator. So you're going to have a really thought-provoking, provocative conversation, and do contact and connect with her. And I would like to ask you, Monica, a question that I ask everybody who comes on the show, it's a silly question, but I find that it comes with it yields some really interesting answers. If you had an airplane that could skywrite something for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Love each other. Love
There
each
you
other.
go. There you go. It is a beautiful and inspiring yet very simple wish.
Yes.
You know, it is, and it's really interesting to me how many of my guests, you all have so much in common. I pick my guests very specifically, honestly, and I can't tell you how many people that or some version of it, love each other, love one another, that you say that it's so that there are people out there like you who believe that love, acceptance, kindness are the path to healing all of us. So I'm
Yes.
so grateful that you were on the show, and I'm
Thank you.
excited for your book to come out. When does it come out, actually?
Actually, it came out November 17th, shortly after I sent it to you.
Okay.
So it's available on Amazon.
Oh, great. Well, I will put the link to the book on the show notes page as well.
Please.
And that way people can get it that way. Terrific. Well, Monica, I'm super grateful that you took the time. Thank you so much for being here. And
Thank you.
it was really my pleasure. And again, very thought-provoking. This is Isolde Trachtenberg. And if you enjoyed the Innovative Mindset podcast, definitely let me know. I'd love it if you'd review the show, rate it. And if you have comments for me or for Monica, you know how to do it on the show notes page. It's going to be isoldet.com/Monica-Harris. That's the URL when the show comes out. It'll be out mid-month this month, right before the holidays. So I'm just saying, you might have a book that you can give as a gift to all of your friends and family. And yes, I would love to hear from you. Until next time, I invite you to remember to listen, learn, laugh, and love a whole lot. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2020. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I send you all of my love.